Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. If you are watching on YouTube, thank you for just accepting this brightness and plainness behind me. It's a little bland in here. We're still reworking the office and just feeling into the environment. So thank you for bearing with me in this kind of plain video. But hopefully the context of this episode really just shines, because I think this has been coming up a lot for people as we are healing. Last year was a 6-year, which was all about relationships. And I think there was a lot of identification of codependency and really leaning into like, what does that mean for us specifically, like on an individual level? What has this shown us on a collective level in history, and how can we shift this and expand this to really serve us? And yeah, I really want to dive into this topic. I have a unique personal experience through all the years of relationships and codependency, and it's so interesting to look at because I think the word codependent or codependency, whatever, can be triggering in a sense where there is like this strong negative connotation with it. And so I want to dive into all the layers. I asked on Instagram if there were any questions about codependence. I got a few questions, I guess, but a lot of like, oh, I want to hear this, and I want to know like what this shift of perspective is. And I will say this isn't anything profound. I'm not a therapist by any means. I'm not an expert in codependency. I don't even know if I know the actual definition of codependency. I'm going to look that up. But I have my own understanding. I have talked about codependence with a therapist. I've talked about codependence on a medical level, an energetic level, a spiritual level, an emotional level, all the levels. So just know that this is from my experience and, just from the guidance that I have received. And also my spirit team is here. So we're going to get all the different perspectives. And if you are somebody who has a history of being codependent, maybe you are in a codependent relationship right now and you're recognizing that, and maybe you are thriving in that relationship. I know that there are so many possibilities, and maybe you're here and you're like, I know somebody who's codependent, and I'm just curious on how maybe this is showing up for them and why. Because if you're somebody who doesn't resonate with that and you're here, thank you. I feel like most of the people listening to this are probably going to resonate on some level of being codependent or having somebody be being codependent, right? Like it's a two-way street. So I'm guessing you've either been there or you are there, and maybe you just know somebody who's there. But to a certain extent, humans, like, we have a tendency to be codependent, right? Like we're here to experience each other, and the way energy is going to operate, it's going to feel safe and secure to rely on what you know, to rely on the familiar energy. And this is really the root of codependence, the energetic root of codependence. It's finding something familiar, something that you desire, this energy that you want within yourself, and you find it outside of yourself in somebody else. And there becomes this dependence because it came to you in a form outside of you, and you stop looking for it anywhere else, right? Like there's this peace that you have knowing that you can get this feeling, this energy, this whatever it is from this person, and it encourages you to be dependent on them for that. Now, where this can be super fun and playful, right? Romantically, this could be super fun and playful, but of course, there's also like the parent-child, there's siblings, there's like, think about all the relationships where dependence, like depending on each other, can be really fun and playful. Now, for me and my experience, and just literally my experience and what I've observed and with clients, is where it crosses the line of like codependence, when you start to believe, like it's your belief that you can't get that anywhere else, like you can't find it within you. So you're always going to rely on this person or this thing. And so the energetic root of this is it's familiar. It's like it's served its purpose before. So your ego, your mind will tell you this is what works. This is where you can get that. And where this becomes unhealthy is where there's other things in this relationship that might not be healthy, or there might not be other just ways that the relationship is operating that are beneficial for you, but you're hanging on to it because of that thing that you crave, you want to receive from that person, right? So you can see how this can become unhealthy if you hadn't had that little breakdown before. It's essentially energetically you're searching for what you desire, and we can experience what we desire through other people. Like that's the whole purpose of connections and relationships. We get to experience different versions of ourselves through other people, because everyone else is just a mirror for us. And so if we're seeing or experiencing something through somebody else and it feels very good, it feels very vibrant, that is living, right? Like that is life. You get to experience that. Where it becomes an unhealthy codependence is where you believe that you can't get that anywhere else. Interdependence is really going to come in when you start healing these beliefs that you can experience something from somebody else, from being in the environment of somebody else, but it doesn't have to be the only way you experience that feeling, that emotion, whatever it is, right? So my experience of this is getting really okay. Over the years, even as a kid, I was pretty focused on what everyone else was doing. I wanted to know like where people were at and if they were okay, and like kind of like where, especially with the family, like I had probably some insecure attachments with my mom. I'd get really worried about when she would leave, like where was she okay? And like like there weren't cell phones when I was a kid, so it was just a big nervous system kind of wreck when she would leave and I didn't know where she was going or how long she was going to be. And as a child, that's I'm trying to think of the word that they even say. But I definitely, like in reflection, judged myself for that. I like, not as a kid, I don't remember like thinking like, oh, why did I react that way? But as I got older, like even as a teenager, because I think my parents would like talk about it, like how I used to get really worried, like when I wasn't with my mom, like it was like I was worried about her. And, that was kind of my first observation and experience of a relationship where I felt like her well-being, like my well-being, depended on her. And of course, like it is my mother, right? like I a part of me was like, well, duh, but that's really my first relationship that I can pinpoint that in this life that I felt that I was really dependent on someone in a way that, as a child, of course, like I'm gonna depend on my mom, but it crossed the line where I couldn't just focus on being a kid because I was so worried about if my mom was safe. And you can see where that doesn't match up, right? And so I recognized that as a young adult. I was like, oh, like what was going on there? And there's been a lot of healing since then, but there's still some underlying things that like make sense to me. And do I know if that was really the truth or not? I don't need to know at this point because I simply don't. But anyway, so that was like my first relationship where I really recognized like, okay, there was some boundaries I don't even want to use the word boundaries, but there was some attachments and some dependency there that I needed that I wasn't getting within myself. Okay. That was years ago, right? Who knows? Like, I don't even know, like, nothing happened of this, right? Like, I just kind of grew out of it. I remember it being a thing, like, none of the other kids had it. I'm the baby. And so my parents were kind of like, what's happening? And eventually I grew out of it. And so, you know, talking about it after I grew out of it, I kind of had that judgment of like, why was I like that? You know, which is important because as an adult, or even a teenager, I would say, and getting into romantic relationships, having the best friends, I was really always focused on having like somebody who was my person. And I didn't have to have the huge friend group. I wanted like one or two really good friends. And when it came to dating, I was like, I don't want to, like, I know who I like. I know, like, I want to be with that person. There's nothing else that I need to worry about. Like, I want that strong, intimate connection. And so as a young adult, I kind of felt that same way. And I feel like a part of me was always looking for the next thing. So like when I knew a relationship was ending, whether that was just because, like, whether it was romantic or a friendship, I feel like a part of me was always like longing for the next thing. And not necessarily like before the last thing ended, but, you know, a part of me always wanted to look for somebody else to fill that void. Okay. And skip forward to later 20s, I learning about human design. I'm learning, you know, I have this fourth line. I have this need to connect and to relate to other people, but it's unconscious. And because I'm my profile in human design is 2-4, and so my fourth line is unconscious, but it is this underlying desire to connect and honestly to be understood and like to really relate with somebody else and to be in the energy of other people. Like that is something that energizes me. Now, I also learned about my second line, which is basically the retreat, right? The hermit and needing that time. And that's where that a lot of that wisdom is. And I think about this as my conscious line. And I'm like, this is not how I have been living my life. I would like almost say my fourth line would be more conscious. It's so interesting. That's actually not what I thought. But in the way that I have operated through relationships in my life, I would think that my first conscious line is not a second line. And so this was a big hit for me in a sense where like I've always craved being in a relationship, whether that's in a friendship, a romantic, like I've always had somebody really close, dear to me that I've spent a lot of time with. And I'm from a family of 6. I have a family of 6 now. So it's just like there was a lot of things. I wasn't a family of 6 when I learned about my 2-4 profile, but it was like, oh, wait. Like, let's actually think about how I've been living my life and how I've been feeling, what I know, right? And let's try some other things because I realized that it another thing with my chart. So I'm not saying if you don't have the 2-4 profile, like this isn't like specific to that. This was just my experience of, you know, I actually am somebody who needs to retreat and needs time away. And a lot of my life, I have resisted that. I have avoided that. And I have unpacked a lot of that because there's a reason why a lot of my childhood, I avoided that. I avoided feeling my feelings. I avoided expressing my feelings. I avoided being alone because there was fear, right? That's that could unlock a whole other conversation. But what is really interesting is when I start experimenting and I say, what does it look like to feel alone? And this is where the codependency really showed up for me, because if you are somebody who has subconsciously just relied on the energy of other people your entire life, and then you go to spend time alone, it feels very uncomfortable. And it can be very uncomfortable. And that's why a lot of people don't spend time alone, is because they're like, what do I do? What do I think about? It's like, what do I do? You know? And so it was a practice for me to learn myself by myself. And that's when I realized how codependent I was, because I had to learn how to be by myself. Now, this is for me. If you are somebody who feels like you have to learn to be by yourself, I'm not labeling you as codependent. I would never, because I feel like codependency is something you either resonate with or not, and it might depend on the relationship. It might depend on the time of year. It might depend on anything, right? So this is not a podcast to determine whether you are codependent or not. I will say that, because there's so many things that are unique to us that the way you operate isn't going to look the same as somebody else. The way you best operate, like the way you operate with ease, the way that your intuition is going to flow to you, the way that you are going to be divinely guided, however that looks. I'm not saying your life is easy. I'm not saying like everything always drops into place, but there is this sense of, this is how it works best for me. Some of our soul contracts are going to be operating best in union. And to the human experience, this may seem codependent. Can you be in union with someone and spend however much time with them and not be codependent? 100%. Codependency is not based on how much time you spend with someone. I never said that, right, in the beginning. And like I mentioned before, I have no idea what the actual definition of codependency is. Actually, let's take a moment for the podcast and just define it, because I know we have a lot of first lines in our realm here. Codependence. Okay. So we're going to define it. And what I want to encourage everyone listening or watching is to create your own definition of codependence and how it may have served you or may not have served you, and how you're going to, like, what would it look like to transcend to interdependence? Codependency is a circular relationship in which one person needs the other person, who in turn needs to be needed. The codependent person, known as the giver, feels worthless unless they are needed and making sacrifices for the enabler, otherwise known as the taker. Okay. Let me see. Hold on. I want like a definition. Here we go. Excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner, typically one who requires support on account of an illness or addiction. Okay. We're going to stick with that. That is the Oxford definition. I specifically like the word addiction in here. Did I talk about my spleen already? I think I did. If I didn't, I also have an undefined spleen. Oh, I don't think I did, because I was going to say I'm mentioning things in my human design chart that are relatable to me, that have brought my awareness into where I have operated from codependence. Does not mean that is your case. That is your story. Okay. Might give you some ideas, but I want to share this just because this is how, like, my awareness through human design has really opened me up to heal where I've been seeking that codependence. And honestly, where I have loved myself through my codependent ways, because I'm gonna put this out there, that codependency, this way of being in relations with someone where it is like this need to exchange. It is this need to support each other in a way that's maybe not necessary. The need to support each other in a way that is not necessary. That sounds so funny, but that actually is what I'm going to stick with for the moment, because sorry, everything's going off. Because I feel like we need to empower ourselves through this. We need to shift the paradigm, like shift the perspective that if we're codependent, like we need to get out. Like we need to leave. Now, or like that's the final answer. When it's not. Like, I want to empower you to feel like there is a gift behind codependence, underneath codependence. Codependence is the manifestation of you recognizing what you need and you found it, and now you're afraid to find it anywhere else. So codependence is really just deciding to not look anywhere else for what you desire. And so when you do that, you close off, and it can become addicting to be with this person when you choose that they're the only thing that can make you feel that way. It's the same thing with substances. If you are choosing that the only way to feel enlightened and elevated is if you do something to get high, like that's where you're going to go. So the same thing with, we think about codependence and addiction, right? Like people who are addictive are codependent on whatever they're addicted to. So, or they're dependent on whatever. But essentially, there's this addiction aspect to it. And my undefined spleen really plays into that for me, because there is this like lower expression, like it's easy for undefined spleens to really fall into this safety net of something that will hold them that might not be healthy for them. So we're going to talk about unhealthy addictions, right? Like, any addiction can lead to being unhealthy if you are addicted to something that is outside of you. But if you have an undefined spleen, you may be more susceptible to kind of learning the hard way of what is good for you and what's not, like what's good for your well-being. And this could be through addictions. For me, it has been like addicted to receiving a specific kind of support, addicted to specific type of relationships, food addictions, right? There's all kinds of ways addictions can come up. We're not just talking about substances or alcohol or anything like that. Obviously we know that those also are addictive, so that plays into that. But this is all kinds of things that you could be susceptible to with the undefined spleen. If you have the spleen defined, you might have, this is where like you have to understand human design is not black and white. I don't want to be like, if you have it undefined, it's this way. If you have it defined, it's that way, because that's not the case. It's not the case at all. But I will tell you there's different expressions and different behaviors that will pop up depending on what's defined and what's undefined. And I find that the spleen really plays a big influence in what you are dependent on, what you rely on for your well-being, for the choices to help you live, right? Like whether that's your physical vessel, whether that is your emotional body, your physical body, your spiritual body, it all is kind of related to that spleen, because in general, the spleen is your intuition, your well-being. So I have found it very comforting to always go and seek somebody else when I'm not wanting to feel a certain way, or if I'm wanting to feel a certain way, and I feel like it has to be shared with somebody else, because a lot of my most passionate, most exciting, most joyful times in life have been in union. And that is, when you look at that mirror, when you look at that pattern in your life, there may be judgment, and that's where there's a lot of this negative vibration held on to codependency. But codependency is a gift where we're able to see what is within us in somebody else, and we hold on to it because we desire it and we think it's not within us. So in anything or relationship that you have this codependence, this could be as simple as waking up and checking your phone. This could be codependence with your phone. And you're like, every morning I got to wake up and I got to check this phone. Whether it's the news, whether it's your Facebook, whether it's your email, like whatever it is, whatever you're checking, right? But there's this need to wake up and check it. There's this dependence on having your phone there. And if I ask you, well, what if you didn't have your phone? I guarantee your nervous system would probably be a little off kilter that first time, right? That's how you know there's some codependence. And this is where I love talking about detachment, because I learned a lot about attachment being a foster parent. They don't, they teach you a lot in like in the classes that you get to be licensed, and I am forever grateful for those classes. I wish there was more discussion on attachment, and I think there was a class on attachment, but it just wasn't. I don't know, maybe I just didn't retain what I wish I would have, or if I knew what I needed to know in the situations that I was in, but I felt heartbroken when I learned more about attachment and the ability or lack of ability to attach based off of what happens in your early childhood years. And here I am learning how to detach. Okay, so I was learning that some kids can't form healthy attachments when they don't have that example as an infant, right? As early as an infant, like new, like fresh out of the body, fresh earth side. It's like our attachment styles are influenced from day one. And there's this pendulum where if you don't learn a healthy attachment, then you can't attach. And if you do have a healthy attachment and you are given space to experiment with that, you could cross the line and get overly attached and become codependent. And some people literally can't be codependent because they are so conditioned to be independent. So it's this big pendulum. So if you're here, I guarantee you're probably somebody who has resonated with codependency before. But if not, thank you for listening, honestly, because all sides of the spectrum need to understand this. All sides of, like both ends of the pendulum, need to understand where the other end of the pendulum is. If you haven't listened to Melissa O'Shea's podcast on here, I think it was episode 20, please go back and listen. She talks about this. Well, we were talking about judgment, and she talked about, if you are able to experience this end of the spectrum, which what we were talking about was judgment, that's because the other end of the spectrum, the other end of the pendulum, right? You can't know this end without knowing this end. Because if you swung all the way this way, that's because you were all the way up here at one point. And she was talking about judgment and love. It was so powerful. I have all the chills back in my body again from that conversation. But essentially, it's the same thing with codependence. It's a behavior, like it's a connection. But if you're there, it's because there is fear of being over here and being independent or interdependent. Okay. And there may be a fear because you've been there before and it didn't feel good. And maybe it's because you X, Y, and Z, right? There could be so many reasons, but maybe it's because of an experience you had when you were left alone, you know? And if you're over here and you've never experienced codependence, it might be because you were left alone all the time and you learned how to survive by yourself. You know, like there's like, you got to give yourself some grace for where you're at right now. And then invite yourself in to say, where do I want to be? Because for me, recognizing this had to come with being really honest. Because I wasn't at a place where I was ready to say, I recognize that this is a codependent relationship, but I also love this relationship. Because as I mentioned before, a codependent relationship doesn't have to be resolved by the two separating. It does have to be resolved as a team, I would say. But that's not up to you also. So let's get into this. This was like a couple things. There's kind of like a lot of information coming in now, but what was the first thing I even said? I had to recognize that I had some codependent tendencies with Amy. Of course, this was one of the things that was sent in to me. It wasn't really a question, but like, oof, like I really feel the codependence with my spouse. And of course we do. Like often there's a spectrum, right? You either do or you don't, probably. Because you're either on that, like, we really depend on each other to do this, this, and this. And it can be in a healthy way, or it can be in a way where it really holds you guys back. And you're going to know. For me, it really came to a point where, okay, I love you. I love spending time with you, but it's not serving us to do every single thing together. And if you are third line, I guarantee the codependence is gonna, I don't want to guarantee anything. That was silly of me to say, but if you're a third line, I'm going to talk about this just for a minute because I love third lines. I value their knowing of when it's just time to like walk away. It's just time to come back, like walk away. I'll come back when I need to, or maybe I won't, but I need to walk away. And there's like this breaking the bond, and there's value behind that we can all learn from if you're not a third line, or if you are a third line. If you feel yourself in these tendencies or what you might identify as codependence, where are you not retreating from that you might need to? And know that things can blend. This might be showing up in one relationship when it's actually another relationship that needs some of the adjustment, but now because it wasn't addressed, it wasn't like you weren't giving that attention that it needed or making the changes that needed, it's going to force you, it's going to encourage you through other areas of your life, which could be through other relationships or just completely other areas of your life. So be open to that. But yeah, if you're a third line, that retreat, that taking it away, like obviously the second line is the retreat with self, but the third line, it's really like breaking this bond to like go experience yourself or yourself without that person, that place, that thing. And then you get to open up for clarity of whether you come back to that thing. And it's not like a probability thing. It's not like, oh, most of the time I always go back. It's no, like there's the clarity comes when you take that step away. So keep that in mind for third lines, with codependence. Like in third lines, you might have a habit of running away or like breaking that bond when you don't need to also. So it's kind of the opposite of what we're really talking about, but something to think about. So being honest with myself, and I've been in several relationships in the past where looking back, I'm like, ooh, this is where we weren't really serving us and our choices on, like, you know, what were we doing together? How are we doing this? And I mean, I know one relationship, it was codependent to the point where it was unhealthy and I left, you know, like that's sometimes how the extremes go. But with my relationship with Amy, who's obviously my now spouse, it's like I can recognize where I crave her energy, where I crave her being next to me. And there's times where we just slip into that, where we're like, this is probably not the best thing, you know, but this is what we want to do. Or, you know, maybe we recognize it after the fact. And this shows up well, and we both have undefined spleens. So oftentimes for us, this shows up as a little bit chaotic and spontaneous, where we'll decide to do things together that, like, it's actually probably best going to serve us or our family if we split up, or if, you know, we rearrange our schedule a little bit. Like, there's just things that we choose to do that, like, probably don't make sense to anyone else, right? And this has come through working of, you know, being honest, of saying, like, I love spending time with you, but I also love giving time to this part of my life and to this part of my life. And when you're in a relationship with somebody who you can tend to be codependent with, it's about communicating from your heart. It's about, like, opening up and saying, like, as much as I want to do this with you because it feels so good, or whatever, like, however you want to express that, I know my soul also wants to do this. And you have to almost, like, take out the perspective of the emotional and that kind of, like, addictive, right? Like, that craving. And you have to remind yourself that whatever I get from this connection, I'm not losing if I'm not doing everything with that person. I'm not losing out if I choose to go be by myself. I'm not losing out if I choose to whatever, right? So the energy that you get in a codependent relationship, or a relationship that feels like it could be codependent, is a reminder of the potency and the passion within you. The codependent bond feels tight. Like, it feels like it's like the strongest magnet, right? It's almost like that. It's almost like, oh, I was gonna go do my work, but since you're here, I'm gonna hang out with you. Like, I do that all the time. And when you become aware of it, then it's a matter of, okay, I made this choice, and I'm living with this choice, and I'm aware of how this might affect how I feel later. You know, like, it affects things, okay? It comes from a different place of saying, I need this. I need to be with her. I can't do what I need to do unless I'm with her. That's different than saying, I know I have some work to do, but right now I want to spend time with you, and allowing myself to receive and be activated in whatever way I need to be from being in her presence. Because I will admit, as much as we have the tendency to be codependent, I love the version I am when I am with Amy. When I'm with Amy, I feel connected with Source. So I feel that with myself too, but it's taken me practice and trust and confidence to know that I can feel that way with myself. And does it feel a little bit different? Yes. But can I get the same feeling? Can I get the same experience? I don't want to say same experience, but can I get the same value of an experience out of being with myself? 100%. And that is what has really helped me transcend any codependent relationship, and has also helped me heal my relationship with food. because codependency, like I said, it's not just about humans, right? We have this in relation to all different kinds of things. And it helped me see it with Amy, because I know my human design like the back of my hand, and I know Amy's, and understanding that really opened me up to like see like what is it that like really magnetizes us? What is it that pulls us together? What is it that almost feels addictive to me, right? Like, what is it? If you're married, like, what do you love about your spouse? What is it that you feel when you're with your spouse? Because those aren't bad things, right? Like, and oftentimes when you think about codependence, you think about the things that pull you together are going to be bad things, which could be. It could be addiction. Like, what was the definition we had here? Because it could be on account of illness or addiction. So the way you can clear this is going back to your intentions. Amy and I redefined our intentions often in our relationships, with our family, with our kids, whatever, for the week, for the month, for the summer. We do it often because if we know what our intentions are, we get really clear on like, what do we need to do together? What do we need to do? What do we need to break off and do? I mean, sometimes it's just your schedules, right? Like figuring out your schedules and honoring each other's schedules is going to be super important. We had quick pause. So we want to get to this point in relationships where there is this healthy dependence, where we're like, what do we want to create together? And how can we do this together? Knowing that doesn't mean we have to physically be together. That doesn't mean we always have to give and take the same things from each other. And that's where you can get into this ebb and flow of, okay, what are our intentions? And this isn't just your romantic relationships. This is all things. This is like with your phone too. What is your intention with your relationship with your phone? What is your intention with your relationship with food? And this is how I really redefined a lot of the things I was doing in my life, was bringing it back to intention. Because if there is somebody in your life who you're like, I love that version of myself when I'm with them, there is nothing wrong with that. And if you have been in codependent relationships before and you feel that, there could be fear that holds you back from truly opening your heart and experiencing what it is that you desire and deserve to experience. So opening up to honesty and if there's someone who is serving as a mirror for you to tap into the potential that you have within you, that is a gift. And we don't need to play down that, we don't need to put that any smaller than what it is. And there is that line. I don't even want to call it a line, but there is that high and low expression of that. I almost want to say like codependency is a low expression of an attachment. And it's here to help us. It's here to show us, hey, this is the attachment. This is the dependency that we're looking at. And it's turned, or it's gone to the point where it's not serving everyone in its best capacity. And if you're tuning into that information, if you're the one receiving this intuitive knowing, like, hey, this isn't serving us anymore, or maybe it's just not serving you, maybe it is serving the other person. And that's where the codependency gets sometimes hard to navigate out of, because there's this expectation that you're going to be there, or that they're going to be there, and when you start becoming aware of like, maybe this isn't the best way we serve each other, something is going to disrupt that. And sometimes that is you, right? Especially if you're the one tuning in, you're the one willing to receive, okay, like, what do we need to do next? What do we need now? And there are going to be times in your life where you feel like you are more dependent on others. And maybe you have those curiosities, like, is this codependence? And you can redefine that for you. You can decide, how am I showing up in this relationship? What's my intention? And then decide, okay, what do I want that to look like? What do I want that to feel like? Communicate that and allow the other person to show up how their soul is ready to show up. And with that, you will have new information. Because in a partnership, like if it's with your spouse or a friendship, you might have the awareness that how you're showing up is no longer serving each other or serving you, right? Like I said before, it might no longer be serving you, but maybe it's still serving them in some way, and they're not ready to see that there are other ways to receive that, or there are other ways to have that exchange. Maybe not an exchange, maybe it's from within them, and if they're not ready to see that, this oftentimes can look like an ending of a relationship, a separation of a relationship, or redefining the relationship. Although I have found when one person just has the awareness that like how they're showing up in the relationship is no longer serving them, and the other person doesn't quite see it, oftentimes they can't quite meet them where they are. And so that doesn't mean the relationship ends, but maybe there's just not as much dependence, So remembering that your awareness and your choices are your gift, right? Like your ability, your freedom. And in relationships and with anything and anyone is really how we're relating and how we're experiencing our world. So tune into your relationships and do like a little inventory. Like, how do you feel about this relationship? What's the exchange there? What am I getting out of it? How does it feel? Like, how does it show up? Do I get that out of anyone else or anything else? And that's where you really need to dig in if the answer is no. Because if you feel like you're getting something from someone or something else that you can't get within yourself, or from something else, I would say within yourself, ask why. Get really deep with that, because they're saying like the guides are here and they're saying basically like where we want to hold on to things is where we think like there's not anything to replace it. There's not anything better. And maybe a part of you doesn't think that it needs to be better, but there's a fear that like, well, what's going to go there? Right. And they're saying like that's the only thing. If that's the only thing that's keeping you where you're at, invite in the option that you are able and worthy to feel whatever it is that you want to feel, all from within. So for me, I'm going to share before we pull a couple cards, but for me, it was a mindset shift around food. I had my relationship with food. I would depend on food instead of processing emotions. And when I started feeling my emotions more and, really processing them and not just eating and doing other things, I recognized that, the food was still there, even though I was feeling what I needed to feel. I was doing a lot of emotional clearing every day. And I recognized like, the food is still there, even though energetically and emotionally, I feel like I don't need it. And, there's these, like, one, it's like the habit of, okay, when was I eating? I was eating a lot at nighttime, like after the kids would go to bed. And that's, when lots of feelings dropped in because I was done doing a lot of things. And so this looked a lot like creating more space to feel during the day and not do as much. Because a lot of things you do, like when you really ask yourself why you're doing it, it's like busy work, right? Like you're just doing just to do it. So this looked like slowing down, feeling more during the day, but a lot of this was giving myself permission to process my emotions in other ways than eating. giving myself permission to like let go of needing to eat, right? Like, one, this is your mind. It just like, if you don't need it emotionally or energetically, like it might just be out of habit, which is what was ultimately it was coming down to in the most recent years, right? And so for me, it was a lot of the mindset shifts, but it was the little things. And also, I'm like, how did I even get to that? How did I even get to this point? But it was also allowing myself to say whatever I was getting by eating, you know, if I stop that, like it does open me up for something else, right? Like it does open me up for like a void. And a lot of people fear that. They're like, well, what's going to go there? Because if it's not any better, then I'm going to go back to whatever, like for me, food, you know? And you have to be open to welcoming in something better there. Like you can't release something and then be like, well, nothing better is coming, because then you're not going to see it as better. And so you have to be open to that. And so I wasn't really able to release like the binging and this one last thing. It felt like one last thing. It's probably not. There's probably a little bit of other strings attached there, but I couldn't release this one last thing until like I gave myself permission to receive better, to love myself more. I couldn't. It was like, whatever you're dependent on, know that you can survive without that. Like it's like this trust that you don't need it. And it's this decision at some point. So it was like deciding that, you know, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to stop depending on eating instead of feeling, and see what comes up. And at this time, I came across an evening yoga class. I came across, my membership that I was a part of, like, moved the time of the calls that they were doing. So those were in the evening. Like, it was oddly weird It seemed a little odd how things just started shifting. So I was like doing different things at night. So my mind wasn't okay. It wasn't like I was like sitting there waiting for, like, it was like a routine, right? Like we would do the nighttime stuff. We would get the kids ready for bed. We'd tuck the kids into bed. And then we would sit down and snack and watch TV. But my schedule was just naturally shifting so that I was doing different things up until bedtime, the kids' bedtime. And so then I had other things that I wanted to do after they went to bed. And yes, it was a choice to commit to these things. It was a choice to welcome some of these things into my life. But it was because, like, they came into my life because I was open to bringing in something with a higher vibration. And part of that is recognizing that, you know, what was serving you at one point is amazing to recognize and to celebrate, and know that you are worthy of more and better. And it doesn't make what was before wrong or bad, or, you know, it doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't say anything about you. What it means is you're growing and you're evolving, and you're honoring that your needs and your desires are changing and shifting as well. So, wow. Okay. That was interesting. The last little tidbit there. I feel like a lot of that was channeled. So I'm going to go back and listen to that. I decided, oh my gosh, I'm going to pull some of the I Ching cards, which, here we go. So these are the 64 gates in human design. It's also related to gene keys. I'm like trying to think of like how else you might relate to these, but the 64 gates. So all the little numbers in your human design chart, whether they're circled or not, those are what these cards are. And they're based off of the hexagrams. And yeah, these cards are so cool. They each have their own like artwork on the back. And then on the other side, it has the gate description. So I pulled 2. I thought this would be a fun way to tap into energy that we have available for us, or just that like is being highlighted. So we have gate 4. I love this. This is like the beginning. Like I feel like the Fool almost, because it is like this freedom, and it's like the potential, like the freedom and like stepping into potential. And it's really it feels like beginner energy, and it's like almost like this willingness to just go all in despite your beginner mindset, right? Like it doesn't matter how much I know or don't know, like I'm gonna get started. Like this is like youthful folly, like I'm ready to go, right? It's like that just like acceptance of it's time to go. It's time to get on this journey. I love that. And then the other one we have is gate 41, and it's decrease. So this is the limitation of resources, which maximizes development of potential. Fantasizing and recognizing the one feeling of value begins the next cycle. Ooh. Okay. So these 2 gates together, I feel I'm gonna pull out a book too to look at really quick, but I feel like these 2 gates, or these 2 cards, let's look at the artwork too. Course. Of course we have little fur friends. Oh my gosh. Okay. So there's this beginner energy, and there's this also like experience wisdom. Hold on. Let me look at something really quick. So, okay, yeah. So when we are wanting to transform, when there's something that we want to like, there's like this feeling of like, it feels like starting something new, but it's because you're wanting to change something. Like there's this activation in you of like, whether it's a remembering or a knowing, right? There's this activation that is going to lead you on this path. And what they're saying is this path is not the path where you're going. It's like what they're showing me. This is so bizarre. What they're showing me is one path is like the game of life, right? Like there's like trees, there's hills, there's all this like landscape and people and like living, like there's life over here, like the game, like literally the game of life, you know what I'm talking about? The game of life is one path, and there's this other path where it's like a checkerboard, like not a checkerboard, but it's like Candyland or something, like it's like just a couple colors, right? Very bland. And they're saying like with this youthful new beginner spirit, you're on this path of life, but you have to pay attention. Like there's going to be lessons, there's going to be all these experiences that you're going to question, or like there's going to be parts of you that wonder like, am I in the right spot? Like, is this right? Am I doing this right? And there is the path, but know that there's other ways available. Whereas this other game, it's like, this is the path, this is how we play the game, and this is what you're doing. And we have this choice and this youthful energy of like, I'm going to start this fresh and I'm going to play this game the way that I want to play it. And you're taking this path knowing that there's all this framework for you, and there's all this knowledge, and there's all this experience, wisdom that you get to experience. But what you see is not the only thing that you see. You get to create as you go. You get to say, you know what? I want to go over there a little bit faster than this path is taking me, so I'm going to make this path over here. And it's like this opportunity. But the gate 41, it's kind of like but keep track of your score. Like, pay attention, right? Keep track of what you're doing, because there's going to be corrections. There's going to be lessons. There's going to be moments where you needed that information, that lesson, to get past the level ahead. Like, think of it like a video game, and I'm seeing it very like visually on a board. And so they're saying, like, follow this new beginner energy, like use this new beginner energy to follow your curiosity, use your imagination, right? Because that's what's going to help lead you and guide you and get you through kind of some of that like experience and like, what did I learn and what do I remember from this? How can I grow from this? Otherwise, you're going to find yourself like circling back, right? That's where we find ourselves. That's where we find ourselves like in the same situations. We're like, I thought we just had this relationship, you know? It's like, follow your bliss, follow this excitement, this curiosity, and use your imagination to learn from your past, to learn from, you know, that path over there wasn't like the outcome I didn't like. So I know I can take this similar path and I can choose a different outcome, and it's going to take me further, or it's going to take me to a different spot, which actually feels better for me. But there's this like desire of experience that's coming, and you need to follow that desire. It's like creating your life based off of like, what is it that you truly desire? And know that there's going to be this like opportunity for correction. Like, it's not a thing you have to fear or worry about when it happens. It's something that is going to like excite you. Like, I know how to solve this problem, because you have this experience of like entering this new version of yourself. That's what they're kind of saying. It's not even like you're entering a new phase. You could be like, they're saying that maybe it's a new job, but it's nothing. It might not be obvious. It might be something more internal, where it's like this new version of yourself, and you're deciding to be yourself. They're like, you're deciding to show up more authentically, and knowing that you're gonna have this kind of experience to learn and grow and become your own problem solver, and to use your imagination to create new ways, new paths, new ways of being, essentially. So that was so good. Gate 41 and gate 4. I will put those down in the show notes as well, if you want to look up more on the gates. So, okay, I think that is all we have for today. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. That is super helpful for the show, and I just love hearing what you guys have to say. It's warm and dear to my heart to hear feedback, especially for my second line. So I would really appreciate that. And again, if you think a friend or you want to share this on social media, don't forget to tag me at the Intuition Playground, and we will talk to you next time on the show.